So, Ritu, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ritu. I'm founder of Aubilities. That's a play on the words all abilities. We are neurodiversity specialists and advocates.
Excellent. And Ryan?
Hey everybody, I'm Ryan McBride. I'm the creative director of content here at Fuse. So I'm in charge of an amazing team of learning producers, animators, and videographers. And I've been collaborating, working with Steve for about 11 years now. So
Wow.
nice to meet you all. I know it's a long time. It's a long time. Some would say too
Steve,
long.
so never, never, never. And Steve Dineen, founder and president of Fuse. So today's session, really excited to talk about finding your learning flavor, really talking about personalization. It's a super exciting subject with the advent of AI, especially now allowing us to do things really dreamed of in the past. Do ask questions as we go. We will probably have some little stops and starts. Check the chat. If you guys have some interesting questions coming through, then we're gonna answer those as we go. Sorry, I'm not leaving, don't worry. I'm just going to go off and get my favorite ice cream. Okay, so in we get. Intro's all done. The first thing we want to hit on, right? Because when we think of personalization first, why is it important, right? Is it important? Is it irrelevant? Is it really relevant to give people a more personalized environment to learn on? And especially in the corporate environment, let's ask the question where, we have to make sure that everything we consider or think about has some type of measurable value going back. So for us, engagement's always been a massive thing, right? I think when we started the company, we really recognized that maybe the first generation of e-learning was great at distribution, but maybe not so great at actually people wanting to choose to learn in a digital format. And so over the years, we've obviously pioneered our ways of doing things and try to create an environment, both with content and technology, that creates high levels of engagement. And what we saw in our data, and this is why personalization is so relevant, what we see in our data, and we ask many of our clients to keep doing the correlation, is to see the people who choose to learn in whatever way they want, whether they're bite-sized or courses or just find anything they need or as an access point. But the people that choose to use the platform frequently, do they perform better than the people that maybe don't consume a couple of courses a year or maybe overconsume? And what the data tends to tell us over and over is there's a certain habit that if we can get our learners to, by the things we do with them, but also the things we do with technology and the things we do with content, that if we get people coming to the platform 2 to 3 times a week of their own accord, of their own choice, because they're seeing the things of value to them, help them do their job, then those people perform higher in their operational KPIs. They accelerate during the onboarding process and they perform better in the jobs. There isn't, as the last bar at the bottom shows, there is an over usage part where people are performing slightly lower than the optimal rate. They're still better than the people that have lower engagement levels. So ultimately, whenever we look at the data for highly engaged clients with great levels of engagement towards it, we see we can map that against operational KPIs and prove high level of correlation against business impact. So ultimately, when we think about personalization and we think about this journey we're on together, what we always trying to think about is how do we take people on that journey from low engagement and the inability to show how a learning platform with digital technology is correlating against business performance, and how a higher degree of personalization, not saying it's the only thing, but it's definitely one big factor. We're going to really break it down in 5 or 6 big buckets to show how we consider personalization, how it can be done. But we want to take people from low engagement and the ability to really not have the ability to correlate to business performance, to those clients and those customers which have these high levels of engagement, and we can do the type of correlation we talked about here and prove there's a connection between the people engaged higher and actually how they do their job better. And today's session is about how we use technology and specifically AI to allow us to now do things we never could do before to increase that level of personalization and increase that capability to have that learning culture in the business performance. So, and again, guys, do feel free to, I'm not going to jump out yet, but do feel free to throw questions out in the background towards it. So when we think of, I guess, around what are the blockers that stop us as an industry to really allowing that personalized environment for us as adults in the corporate learning world, but also for the generation of children that come as well, for our own children. So one is understanding neuroscience, and specifically, we'll talk about neurodiversity today. So how we understand how that has an impact on how we learn, how language can be a barrier in that type way, at the moment of need, and recognizing that there are different ways to consume content, to get to experiences, depending upon that moment of need that I need to learn. So whether that's foundational learning versus I'm stuck with a problem, right through to generational learning preferences. No doubt our brains are being recoded by the tools that we use. So a TikTok generation is probably going to want and desire content in a slightly different format to those that maybe have been born in a YouTube style way. Obviously, we'll talk also about the cost of personalization and the technology challenges, usability challenges that we're now able to solve. So maybe a quick question we always ask, but it's always good. And it's always interesting to see how this changes year on year. So I think there is a poll that's going to be made available. And what we're going to ask is for you to answer that quick question of, and I think this is where I go to the poll. And the question is going to be, which is your personal preference? Which type of tool outside of your corporate lives allows you to give you what you're after? So let me have a little think. I'm just going to hit 1 second while I get some assistance here. Assistance? Just to see where the polling session is, and then we'll get that poll up for you super quick. Go for it. Oh, there you go. It's the one that says poll, is it?
Yeah, where is it?
Or maybe it's, oh yeah, polls, yeah. Here we go. First one now. Let's launch that. Thank you. So let's go for it. So how do you learn your personal lives? Wow, that was quick. Wow, guys are quick. It's quite exciting, yeah. I think it's going to win. Is YouTube or Google? TikTok's still up there. ChatGPT starting to get into her place. It's like a horse race. And it's all settling down, still going. Can you see what I see? Or is it just
I just get told I'm not allowed
bars
to
going up and down? Can you see that? You can. Phew. Okay. It's just otherwise good. I think it's settled down. And I think we have a winner. Or I think actually, is it first all? So between Google and YouTube are our two winners. So 34%, so 68, all someone's on Google. So 34% to 33%. But between the two and Google, 67% of people are going to YouTube and Google. We've got about 20% just undergoing to ChatGPT, which probably wouldn't be there 18 months ago. And TikTok is 9%. I'd be super interesting though, to see generationally whether there's a preference inside those that as well, whether a certain generation has a preference to TikTok versus those that have a preference to YouTube, Google, and other type technology inside there. All right, so let's jump Rita over to your session. So I guess one of the big things then to just tee you up here, right, is for us, personalization and inclusivity are, hand in glove, right? They're absolutely kind of key and torn together. Well, I'm going to put something out there, right, that I think this topic around learning preferences and modalities is a kind of bit of a taboo subject in our industry, right? Because there was some research did a year ago around the visual audio kinesthetic part towards it, that maybe the research wasn't done well. And therefore, everyone kind of bagged it on to say you can't even talk or mention about the fact that there's any type of learning preference whatsoever. I think the thing, and I think it's a shame, right? Because although that research maybe wasn't done well, it was a shame that that stopped any research happening in that type of area. So maybe if you could, I guess, help us first of all understand what neurodiversity is and how then it impacts learning. You go for it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Steve. So if we just go to the next slide.
Oh,
There we go. What is neurodiversity? So let's answer that question first to make sure that we're all on the same page. So neurodiversity is a term that refers to the natural variation in human brains, right? So the normative range of function for most people. And so those that fall within the normative range are often referred to as neurotypical, meaning that an individual that has typical cognitive functioning. Those that fall outside the normative range, which could be higher or lower or a combination of both, are usually referred to as neurodivergent. So neurodivergents have non-typical cognitive variation. So just a little bit of a theory there, a concept. So if we go to the next slide, please. So common examples of neurodivergent conditions are conditions like autism, ADHD, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyslexia, Tourette's syndrome. This isn't an exhaustive list, but the key thing is that neurodiversity, the term, encompasses a spectrum of different types of neurodivergent conditions that can present themselves in different ways. And of course, people may have more than one as well. So if we look at autism as an example and just home in on that a little bit, autism is often characterized by differences with social interaction and communication and a possible tendency for repetitive behavior. So my son is autistic, he's age 8, he was diagnosed at age 2, and I was recently diagnosed autistic over a year ago. And strengths can include the way in which we process information. So again, falling outside of that normative range, preferring routine and structure, preference for sequences, and much more. And if I just take one more example, maybe something that's slightly different from autism, so let's look at ADHD. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and it's characterized as differences with regulating attention and executive functioning. And strengths for ADHDers can often include being spontaneous, a preference towards gravitating towards interests and things that they find interesting over any sequential work, and being hyper-focused, and much more. So next slide, please. And keep those examples in mind. There's a reason I chose those two. Right, so today, more than 15% of the workforce is neurodivergent, but it's really, really good to note that that figure is based on those that are diagnosed. So we estimate that the real figure is a lot higher, where some people being self-diagnosed and some not being diagnosed as yet. They may not be sure if they are neurodivergent. Still, that's 1 in 7 people. So we're everywhere and in every organization. And thanks to higher profile personalities, such as Elon Musk, Richard Branson, and more, some of the judgment and stigma is reducing. But according to a recent study by Birkbeck University, we still see up to 65% of neurodivergent individuals that fear discrimination in the workplace and therefore do not come forward and disclose their neurodivergence or seek support. So how does this relate when it comes to learning methods? Well, it's a similar thing. People don't necessarily know if they're neurodivergent or not. They may not seek support, but let's take a look at some real examples. So we go to the next slide, please. Okay, great. So I mentioned 2 examples earlier on ADHD strengths and autism strengths. We've got, just on this panel list, 2 great people here who are neurodivergent, Steve, ADHD, and myself, autistic. So Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about your learning preferences when it comes to the way your brain is wired?
Let's go to the first one. So first, if I think about, let's say, the structure of learning, how do I want to see that, right? So my preference on a menu would be show me everything there is that I could learn around this topic, and I'll choose by dopamine hit. What I mean by that is I'll choose by interest level. So for me, the logical structure isn't necessarily something my brain has to adhere to. So for me, like I would be happy. Normally, I'd look at 20 things. I might do number 17 first, then number 3, then number 2, and then number 7, and I'm doing it in order of interest towards me, right? So interest level is my priority level of that. And for you?
So being autistically wired, I'm the opposite to Steve. I don't want to look at everything and then pick my interest level. I actually much prefer sequential. And I actually prefer if things are in order and I can do them in order, like a set of instructions, so that I can understand step 1, that logically then leads to step 2. So that's my preference.
So then we go to the bottom piece, right? So in terms of media, if I have, I mean, I read a lot of books over my time, but I remember one book I read was on the human mind by Professor Winston, which was about 400 or 500 pages of pure text, no pictures, and explaining, real details about how the human brain works. And it was, tough for the ADHD brain to get through it. Had to stop and pause, and it took time to get through the whole type thing. And at the end of the book, it said, as you can see, as you can watch in my 6-part BBC miniseries, so there's a TV program on the book. So my preference would have been absolutely, after a couple of weeks reading that really intensive book, it would have been to watch that. Obviously, I can read it. I did read it. If I have to, then I'm going to do it. But it wouldn't be my preference. My preference as an ADHD brain is to stimulate me. So if that is listen, watch, that's great. If social interactions are great. And although reading's okay, it's probably not my biggest preference. For you?
Well, it's the opposite again. So for me, I don't want to watch a 4-minute video or a documentary or whatever it might be. I would prefer to read. Now, the amount I prefer to read might vary. So depending on the topic, maybe I just want the top 3 bullets or the highlights or the summary, and I don't need to read everything. But reading's my preference because that's how I absorb the information best. And I just want to add one more point around this. So obviously we're touching on the way ADHD and autistic minds are wired. And of course, there's many other neurological variances as well that we covered on the previous slide. But also this is heavily linked to cognitive abilities, right? So I'm going to use my son here as the example. So he's 8 years old, and in the UK, when you're about 5 or 6, you have to take a test in school. And the test, one of the questions is a maths question. And it asks something like, if Tom had 5 green apples and Sally took away 3 green apples, how many green apples does Tom have? Now, he's autistic and his cognitive abilities are linked to numerical, not language reasoning. So he could not understand that question. He couldn't understand what it's asking him to do. And sequentially, he failed that test. But then if you ask him, what's 5 take away 3? Within a second, he can give you the answer because it's numerical and he totally understands. So the cognitive abilities are linked to his autism of how he perceives and views information and absorbs that information. So just another example there.
Maybe just one more example, and I do think actually interesting because you always make the point, and I think someone just come into it and actually made the point on it, which is obviously within inside this spectrum, there are plenty of people that are both ADHD and autistic and maybe dyslexic as well.
Yep, exactly what I mentioned earlier, that we're not just one necessarily, we can be a combination. And actually also the topic will depend on what our preference might be, right? So that we might choose a written format for a particular topic, we may choose visual for something else. But naturally our brain, depending on how we're wired, tends to follow a comfort area, a comfort piece, should we say.
And then there is physical, but because even within ADHD, for example, so anyone wants to come up for dinner, we have a family of 5 ADHD people, 3 kids and myself and my wife. So definitely a lot of hyper energy you can bottle up and sell. But inside my wife's ADHD, she also has part ADP, so auditory processing. So when she's watching a video, it's actually really hard to listen and to process that, which is probably and for me, if you try and each of us, if you try and see us ever recite the words to a song, it's impossible, right? But it is very funny to watch. But our brain processes that in a different way.
Well, that's exactly it. So it's about understanding. We're going back to what you were saying earlier, Steve, around learning modalities linked with possible neurodivergence or not, linked with cognitive abilities, right? And what that looks like then in terms of a solution.
And I think what it gets you towards is you can't be black and white in any of this stuff, right? I think ultimately it's about choice and it's about the technology tuning in and giving those different choices to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for us, just a nice little quote before we move on to a quick survey of our own. But of course, multiple learning modalities is crucial to engage a variety of brains to learn in a way that best suits their needs, right? Because great minds think unalike and learn differently. But if we go to the next slide quickly, Steve. There we go. So Steve and I are working together on this hypothesis around learning and neurodivergence. And we have got on board a steering committee and we're doing a lot of experimentation around this notion of learning and neurodivergence. So what we thought we'd do with this group of attendees today is we're going to ask you, and maybe someone can put it in the chat, the link in the chat. We're going to ask you to complete the anonymous survey that we've put together. It's only 3 questions, but that will be our first point of understanding if there's a link between learning and neurodivergence. So if I could kindly ask you to just complete the forms, only 3 questions, that would be
just in the background. So you should have it in chat for those that want to partake. And for those that want to do something bigger, I mean, not to promote you too heavily during the session, Ritu, right? But Aubilities obviously does provide what you do for companies, and I'm sure for maybe a free part, you might do for the people in the webinar, but you do allow that self-assessment, right? So for those that are wondering, do I have a bit of that? Do I have a bit of this? Maybe just while the guys do the quiz in the background, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're one step ahead of me.
Sorry.
No, you're good. So our next slide, which we'll come to when you're ready. There we go. Offers a demo of our platform. So ultimately, we focus on 3 key components, which is education. So a lot of digital content and virtual sessions through our platform, and then support mechanisms. So as Steve mentioned, it's about understanding how people's brains are wired. So we have some assessments that lead to strengths and challenges, feelings and preferences, mental health checkpoints, accommodations, adjustments, and we've been working in collaboration with Durham University on that, with their Department of Psychology and Neurodiversity. So we've got some demo assessments. They're not the full assessments, but they give you a little bit of a play around also within the demo. And then finally, everything we do, we track from a data perspective anonymously to ensure that we can give that data back to organizations so that they can move a step closer towards neuro-inclusion.
Okay, before we move on to this session, so and apologies for those who've got a firewall. So later on in the session, can you have a look at the results of that and then feed it back?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's give us a thumbs up when you're ready to show that. So we want to move on to this first session. This first session was really, I guess, just helping us all understand there are differences, and it's hard to ignore or say this whether you're visual, auditory, moment of need, that there is definitely something in different moments and different brains and so forth that does have an impact towards it. And maybe to that point, I think it is fair, right? Up until now, I guess we've haven't really had the capability to do much about it. And it is a time that comes from time to time. And I think just taking this from Terry, one of our clients, he calls this punctuated innovation. So normally innovation is kind of like, step by step. So, and then things like the printing press, fire, and generative AI do come along that allow this short burst of rapid revolution. That's the kind of the moment we're in now. And we're all trying to figure out how do we solve what was unsolvable problems before. And that's the truly exciting moment I think that we get into, saying we can now maybe start doing more research on how we're different in the knowledge we have now tools to personalize and solve the cost issue. And with that in mind, we're going to pass over to the magnificent Ryan McBride, the one and only, who's going to talk a little bit about how AI and technology in general is already allowing us to create multiple modalities from one source of media. Over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Steve. So first and foremost, I just want to say, I think this is a really exciting time for learning professionals and content creators specifically. And I think that's because we're finally able to address a long-standing issue, and that's that most corporate and academic learning is unfairly biased against many people. And I don't believe that's an intentional thing, but I believe it's there because of some factors that now, with the power of AI, are not a factor anymore. So Steve, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So there's always been a lack of resources to make personalized learning, and it's probably because would have been really, really expensive and really, really complex to do. And this has made it very challenging, and if not impossible, to provide personalized learning at scale. And thus, if you could go to the next slide, please, Steve. As a result, pretty much everyone has become fixed on a one-size-fits-all approach. One that I'm sure everyone will recognize from one time to another. But everything historically has been crafted in a single learning modality or a text-heavy SCORM course, right? And that didn't take into consideration target audiences, their unique minds, as Ritu and Stephen mentioned, and importantly, how they want to learn as well. And I think this has led to gaps in learning outcomes and massive gaps in engagement, leaving a lot of people probably feeling left out to a certain degree and also unmotivated to participate or consume the one-way type of learning, which I believe fundamentally is something we need to address going forward. If you go to the next slide, please, Steve. Thank you. So a lot of people I spoke to initially, I think, viewed AI as a way to quickly produce more text-heavy courses. But I believe that misses the potential of what AI can do. And by focusing solely on quantity, ignores the opportunity to create a more inclusive and personalized learning experience. And I think the big thing is why would we want to make something faster many, many times over that people not necessarily enjoy or want to consume? And I'm really passionate about bridging the gap, not just between modalities, but bridging the gap between how people learn at home and how they learn at work. And it's like when Henry Ford started making cars, if he would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said they wanted faster horses as opposed to faster courses. So if you go to the next slide, please, Steve. Thank you. So I think it's really about embracing AI as a tool for inclusivity rather than just a means for speed and consistent distribution of one modality of learning. And I think that we can, if you use it in the right way, and the way that I'm going to show you is pretty exciting, you will be able to transform educational material into many modalities, but also enable learners to have a more personalized and effective learning experience, which hopefully drives many, many metrics, engagement, people being able to retain information longer, all those things. And I think it's something we really, really need to think about. So Steve, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And the thing that I'm going to be really talking you through today is utilizing bite-sized video or video as your source, your key source, to create content in multiple modalities. And by doing this, I believe that we are totally removing cost and time to create personalized learning as a barrier. Go to the next slide, please, Steve.
Okay, got it.
Thanks. So I want to give you a real life example. We did a massive project recently for this organization called Levy in America, who do all of the catering and beverages for hockey games, baseball games. They do stuff even in the UK at the XL and whatnot and stuff like this. But we had to shoot a very, very important video for them because they have the Levy way of doing things, right? And what we wanted to do is digitize the brains of their best people, turn that into video-based content, and enable everyone to learn in the Levy way, right? So one of the videos we created, for example, as you can see here, is the perfect way to make a mojito. So if I go out and shoot that content, as default, I have the ability to watch that and listen to it because I've got the audio, whether that be voiceover or the subject matter expert talking through that material. But because of the AI infuse is so powerful and able to understand everything inside the video, it can transcribe everything that's said in the video to 99 point whatever percent degree that's correct, and we're enabling people to read the content. As Ritu said earlier, she is very much would prefer to read how to make a cocktail, whereas I think Steve would like to watch one as well as drink one. But it doesn't just stop there, right? So the transcript also enables AI conversations about that content. So if Steve's about to go onto his shift at Twickenham Rugby and he's forgotten how to make the drink, he can ask it just like you would ChatGPT, and he can get the steps of how to make the perfect drink. If he's got a little bit more time, he can also ask the expert who created that piece of content. So what I really want to hit home about here, guys, is by shooting one piece of content with a subject matter expert making a mojito and having the audio to support that, I'm able to cater for 5 multiple modalities straight off the bat with Fuse. And just by utilizing video or bite-sized video as the prime source of material that we use for our educational content for our customers. Could you go to the next slide, please, Steve?
Yes.
Thanks, man. So, yeah, and the thing is, I think it's pretty insane. As I mentioned, I've been here quite a while. I would never think that having a video would essentially be able to turn it into 5 different things, 5 different ways people can consume content. And what I'm realizing day in, day out is that AI's as you probably all know, AI's changing every single day, as Steve likes to tell me. But what we're understanding now is that there's different tools that we're thinking to utilize to create other modalities of learning, right? So there was a really cool conversation going on between some thought leaders the other day, some neurodiverse thought leaders, and I thought, oh, this is a great meeting. It's an hour long. I'd love to share it with my team. So one of the things we're playing about with now is pumping that through another AI that we're looking to embed. And I'm able to turn that 1-hour meeting into a concise, punchy 10-minute podcast that has all
Play it. Play it. I think I could play it.
Yeah. That I could listen to on the way home in the car.
Yes, there we go. Just do my. If the can allow me to.
I built that up, man.
Can you hear?
No.
Okay, I just need to reshare the slides with just reshare the slides with sound. Sorry, my bad. Let's go with that. And there should be share sound button. Yeah, got it. Oh, and to go back and share that. Should now be able to.
All right, so today we're doing a deep dive
Can you hear
into
that now?
digital learning,
Yeah.
and more specifically,
We need a way to gather data on learning preferences while being respectful of privacy and avoiding any sense of judgment or labeling.
right, because nobody wants to feel like they're being put in a box.
Yes.
And it seems like Rita and her team over at Aubilities might be onto something. They figured out this clever way to let users input their learning preferences anonymously.
Oh, that's brilliant. I really think anonymity could be the key to removing those barriers and getting honest, unfiltered feedback.
Exactly. Users feel empowered to share what works for them without
Yeah, just hitting that point. But yeah, to the point, I mean, again, it's just, I think we're just showcasing that we're going to be starting to see, like, literally every week there are new ways to use that source, that body raw source of knowledge. And sometimes a 10-minute podcast, I'm in the car going for a walk, and maybe that's my preference way of doing it rather than listening to 1 hour of us. And sorry, Ryan, the last point.
No worries. And I think the final thing I sort of want to leave you guys with is we're not the only ones thinking about this. We think everyone should be thinking about it. But what we've noticed recently, some of the big players are thinking about it as well. Even the likes of LinkedIn over the last couple of weeks has created a video feed very similar to TikTok, so you can scroll through bite-sized pieces of content. But it's also taking video as its source and creating that into more tinier pieces of information that people can consume to cater for younger generations. I know when we did the poll at the beginning, I'm very much in that same degree of YouTube and Google, but everyone's thinking about having to have this personalized learning. Essentially now, that cost and time to understand personalized learning to a significant degree is removed. I think it's absolutely insane that you can turn one piece of thing into 5 different modalities of content. And then even now, Steve's telling me at the weekend there's 2 more that I'm going to know about next week.
Well, and to the point, I think it's interesting seeing LinkedIn last week, right? So LinkedIn now, I think on this generational part's interesting, right? Because even, we had that question earlier on, and I know of which tool you go to. I pretty much guarantee that it was a higher generation of younger people that went to TikTok. Not saying exclusively, but a higher percentage, and maybe a higher percentage of some of the other tools. And it is interesting that LinkedIn literally last week is now has as a second feed, has its main feed, which those who've been using LinkedIn for 20 years is using, but it now has a TikTok style 30-second, 45-second feed on LinkedIn. So obviously it's I guess looking at saying, if it's offering both, is it now going to pull in the younger generation, which is probably what it wants to do, as well as having people that have been using LinkedIn for 15 years. But to the point, to automatically create content for it, from that one source, super interesting. Ritu, how are we doing with with our survey?
Yeah, really, really interesting responses. So we've got a good response rate. I know some participants had to drop and some were blocked by the firewall, but we've had a good amount respond. Probably about 55 to 60% of those on the call. And so the first question asked, how do you identify your neuro status, i.e. neurotypical or neurodivergent, or don't know, or prefer not to say? And interestingly, from those responses, 34% said they are neurotypical.
Wow.
Nearly 29% said they are neurodivergent. So that is how they identify. And this is really interesting. Nearly 36% said, I don't know. So there's a huge portion of people that might be, uncertain, or might have multiple neurological variances, but just not sure at this point in time. And then if we take the amount of people that said, yes, they are neurodivergent, and we look at what neurotypes they are, so that is what types of neurological variances, the highest recorded was ADHD. So nearly 23% ADHD of the amount that said they were neurodivergent.
Welcome.
And that was followed by dyslexic, so just under 10%. And then autistic, so just over 5%. And then there's various other ones that scored lower in terms of percentages. And then the most interesting piece probably is, what is the learning preference of all these people that have responded? And a whopping nearly 74% have said infographics, 1-pages of information, including visuals, so a mixture of both. But that is very, very closely, but about 64% followed by bite-sized animated videos or some type of videos, and then PDF written documents, and then audio, so i.e. podcasts and things to listen to. There are plenty of people who've written other things that interest them as well under the other category. I won't go into them, but there is quite a few different ways of learning methods, but those scored the highest in terms of percentages.
Amazing. So, and I think as we go, that's again nice to have a little spot check. And I think the research we're going to be doing, hopefully with some of the universities and UCL and our clients, is going to allow us to get a much broader, richer set of data to really dive in and get the answer to some of these questions. There's some good questions coming in. I want to pause those to make sure we have an opportunity to get through a little bit more content, and then maybe we'll come back and answer some of those questions. So far we've looked at personalization in a couple of different ways. The next one we're going to look at personalization is around the actual moment of need. So for those not completely familiar with the work of Bob Mosher and his organization and Charles Jennings, both talk to similar frameworks, right? So Bob Mosher, and apologies, Bob, if you're on the call, because I know the ordering of this is an order I like rather than the official order. So the 5 moments of need is basically saying we don't just learn from a course, we will learn something new. That the new bit is one part towards it, but actually it's probably a relatively small part to our whole learning journey. The more bit's interesting, the more bit says, in our jobs and our roles, if you're a product expert, you're continuously learning about your product because your product's changing all the time, especially in the software industry. There's a moment of learning around change, and then this moment of learning around I need to solve a problem or I need to apply something I've just done right now in the moment to go do it, solve and apply being side by side. The reason why I mention that is historically, things like 5 moments and 70-20-10 have been quite costly to apply and to do, even though all the research says it's great, because of the cost of how do I build content in 5 different ways. So again, I think with technology and with AI and with some thought leadership and thinking, we I think find it super excited about the fact that it's quicker and faster. So first of all, to map these 5 moments into 2 examples, right? So for us, things like new learning could obviously be where the LMS and the LXP industry kind of is today, right? In most places where you've got those learning paths, courses, and so forth, that give you some base knowledge that you could hopefully retain and then apply towards it, especially if it's easily accessible. The more part, and this is what we're now differentiating between that pull and push training. So push is officially, I've got to do it before I do my job. The pull bit then is I'm also suggested, and it's kind of push, kind of pull. So one of the things that a lot of our clients use is they have a continuous learning plan. So a learning plan about their role that automatically sweeps up all the new knowledge, the new processes, the new product updates into a weekly or bi-weekly learning plan that they have to get 100% on and stay up to date on. And that's one of the things, just that visual thing that really drives people to keep up to date. Some people obviously through curiosity, and then what we'll talk about is that how do we use technology in an automated way to do the solve and apply bit. So we're not having to create all this content in one go, but again, that we can create these 5 moments through the capture of content in one format. And just again, explaining maybe on a screen before we go into some of the bits around that. So if we look at practically, we can look at ultimately problem solving, solve and apply is ultimately about how do I find the accurate, interesting knowledge. For those people that said ChatGPT or Google, that's what we're doing. So how do we have a corporate version of that allows us to quickly search and find the video, the file, the course, or maybe just the answer they need to help me make that choice. James Bond and how do I cut the blue wire or the red wire? I haven't really got time to do the whole type thing. Or that YouTube video that I want to go watch. So for us, search is absolutely critical to making that part work well. And now with technology automating that whole part. Obviously, we got the foundational courses. I think not radically things change here, apart from our love of building foundation courses from bite-sized content, bite-sized learning, like LinkedIn and Udemy does. LinkedIn and Udemy content is a series of videos in the main and a series of assets in the main, articles, videos, content strung together into a path. And one of the things I really love, which many of our clients are doing, is this concept of this must watch. It's my constantly changing, evolving learning knowledge and must consume in a visual way to understand how I'm doing with that and whether I'm up to date or not. And then if we go, I guess we touched on interface, right? So what I like about this more piece, and I'll just go back to this concept of more. So this bit here, which is Bob's more piece. So new we know about. That's kind of your standard course. More is kind of like this concept here of my must-watch content or my curiosity feed. Now, inside Fuse, what we do is if you've got a feed, it will recognize, will remember what you've learned and what you've learned, or what you've watched and haven't watched. Not necessarily learned, but what I've consumed inside of it. So therefore, when I want to go through my learning plan, it's going to say, well, actually, you've already watched these 3-4 things in your feed. So you need to kind of catch up on these things over here as well. So it's a nice way to formalize the informal, if you like, and maybe just back to here, giving people both those choices. So in here, I've got more of that feed YouTube style approach. That's personalized, recommended, bite-sized knowledge relevant for my job. And then over here, I've got the alternative is, if you missed it, then actually here's where you can catch up. What we're going to go into next then is the final bit, right? The 70% bit or what, if we go back to here, what Bob talked about as solve and apply. Now, this has been, I think, one of the biggest things that Charles loves and Bob loves, but it's the hardest thing, I think, to get clients to do, because normally you're talking about building content in a different way than we build courses in. And therefore, how do you automate the ability for people to find the information and the knowledge they get to? So for us, the first thing central towards this is the universal search, right? The ability to connect all your different platforms together, your Udemys, your LinkedIns, your Fuses, other LMSs, if relevant, towards that as well, and bring that towards centralized search that intelligently understands all that content in a deep, rich way, and then allows you to make that search. And if I'm searching for, creating a pivot table, it won't just recognize the course according pivot tables. It recognizes there's a video inside LinkedIn, or there's a course on inside Fuse, or maybe a bite-sized asset somewhere else, and bringing that through into really friendly AI search type path towards it. So one front door to get towards it. And one front door for us is both search, but also browse and stuff as well. Obviously, again, with AI, we go a step further. If we look at what, I guess, the latest generation of generative AI is doing for us, it makes our content smarter. Our clients, for a long time, for like 5-6 years, many of them have called Fuse their corporate brain. To some degree, it's still kind of a dumb corporate brain, right? You still have to work. It's still taking you to the file of a pivot table. It's not necessarily taking you to the answer that's inside of it. Obviously, what generative AI does at a global scale is it's crawling the world knowledge. It's then making a copy of that, is then re-indexing that in a new database called a vector database. And that's what we interact with through different technologies like Google and ChatGPT. So obviously what we've now done is something similar. So using the same type of technologies and with a vector database, we're now reformatting, and literally now in beta with our clients, reformatting the content within those files, those transcripts and so forth, to make this funky vector database stuff. And that's the stuff that now allows us to ask questions of. So instead of if I type in, how do I create a pivot table, rather than create a pivot table, it recognizes, like Google does, that's a question, right? So that's a question. So I'm not looking for a resource, I'm looking for the answer. So therefore it's looking in this vector database, and it's basically extracting out or creating the knowledge from the content that exists from the experts. So if we were to use, for example, with Ryan, if somebody at Levy Restaurants wants to know how to make a mojito, it would recommend from their content how to make the mojito. If we have time, we'll show it. If then it says what's the best type of rum, it will recommend the best type of rum from only the expertise that is digitized, not the outside world. We want to pick that off. We're not trying to compete with those global GPTs and so forth, but the equivalent stuff just for internal knowledge. And that was just a practical example we did earlier. On that one, I said, how do you create a pivot table? What's the best? Actually, it's got a pivot table here. But how do I make a mojito? And then actually, which rum do I choose? So the practical example of now how we're adding this third element, right? Or we're adding the 70% bit, or those other moments of need that that Bob talked about, but not having to spend all the time and cost of actually creating content as performance support. Literally, Ryan just created those 100 videos with the team around the world, all that great tacit knowledge, uploads it raw into the platform, and then this stuff then is available out of the box, and allowing that personalized moment of need to go happen. Not sure what that video is.
It's not mine.
Oh, I love this video, but not this one for now. Not yet. So again, just finishing off, because I want to hit, because again, when we talk about personalization, what we're just now refreshing ourselves on the side of this, right, is we're saying whether it's 70-20-10, which is a great modern learning framework, or it's 5 moments of need, we're recognizing that we want to personalize the content and the experience, ideally automatically now using AI, rather than have to figure it all out. And that's what this technology is doing. First of all, is bucketing all the things in the right area, and now the technology do the hard work, whether that is the recommendations or whether that's extracting the answer for us as a solve and apply stuff is all about. Could be the video I'm after, could be a file, it could just be the answer. So then if we pause, actually, let's take a quick question, because I'm worried the fact that we've done all the talking. So let's give you the first question, which is, there's a lot of questions here, actually. Let me get the first one I saw. Yeah. What's your take on self-diagnosed preferences? Employees are not experts in learning, and even some experts have no clue how it actually works. So some employers might have preferences, but might not be the whole truth.
So first of all, totally agree. So a lot of people don't always know what their preferences are. And we've been a bit cheeky with the survey that we posted with the 3 questions, and that's just for this group. But let me give you an example of something that we do. So in our platform, where we want to identify neurological traits or cognitive abilities, we don't ask the users who are completing our surveys, our assessments, questions like, what do you prefer? Because you're just going to answer what you might think, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the way your brain's wired. So a lot of our questions are experiential questions. So we have listening questions, we have visual questions, we have graphs and numerical questions. We have a variety of different ways to assess how the brain is wired, which then leads to the answer of how you might be cognitively wired, as well as what your likely neurodivergent traits might be, etc. So when it comes to learning, and this is what Steve and I are going to hypothesize and experiment in the experiment that we mentioned we're pulling together, we're going to find out if there is correlation between neurodivergence and learning, but we wouldn't ask directly the learners, what's your preference of learning, like we've done today. That's just us getting a quick poll. But actually, it's about designing an experiment which leads us to the conclusion, but not asking the individuals directly, because you're absolutely right in your comment. People could be self-diagnosed and they might not get it right and they might not know the whole truth. So we can't rely on that. I hope that answers the question for you.
Thanks. And before maybe get into some other ones, let's just a little bit more context, because I think there's some really cool things I want to go through. Like, one of the other things we've talked through, I guess, is recognizing that language is a barrier and a preference, right? So my wife's Italian. There's no doubt that given a choice, she'd prefer to learn Italian than to learn in English, right? Because it's harder work. You know, we did a lot of research over the years with Fuse School, our charity, where we put content in different languages and different accents to see the impact towards it. And I think Sophie Vergara probably explains it best in this little comedic piece.
It's not mine.
Do you know how
You
frustrating
hear
it
okay?
is to have to translate everything in my head before I say it? To have people laugh in my face because I'm struggling to find the words? You should try talking in my shoes from 1 mile.
I think you meant.
I know what I meant to mean. Do you even know how smart I am in Spanish? Of course you don't.
It does go into the fact that he then tries to speak in Spanish, and she says, "I love you even more now. Now you sound stupid." But on a serious note, though, she says it perfectly, right? It's definitely harder to learn in a second language, and obviously, again, with technology, the cost of translating content, not just subtitles, but actually listening and being cognitively preferable, right? So we've already said some people prefer audio, you know, whether it's audio, I've got dyslexia and my preference is that towards it. And some people are going to prefer to text, maybe because they've got hearing disabilities in terms of it. So undoubtedly, you put that other barrier of language inside it, it's tricky. So again, I think what's
It's not mine.
super interesting, not to hear it
Frustrating.
twice, so let me just skip that because Google, jump to the next one. So again, what we're seeing from a technology side is a massive generational change inside of it. So again, just with some of that content, this was just an example.
Subcontractors are
One of our client in English, and then literally now quality levels to be able to press one button.
Los subcontratistas son empresas externas, marcas locales.
Is almost there. So again, towards the end of the year and next year, we're launching as a service now the ability to do this pretty much automatically, right? So if on those 100 videos, his client Levy wants those 100 videos, literally Ryan just presses one button and those videos are now in Spanish with almost perfect dialogue towards it, right? And inflections and in terms of it. In what we've actually done in our partner is actually worked with, I think, 7 different AIs that are combined together to best practice. So the best text to speech, speech to text, the best translation, text to text, the best then speech to text towards it. So fusing all those AIs together to solve that problem of allowing those people that want to listen to be able to listen in mother tongue. So, you know, so far as Sophie Vergara, she can now have the ability to be as smart in her own language towards it, which is totally cool. And likewise, interface, again, you know, in terms of it, there's no point translating the content if the interface doesn't dynamically change. So again, one of the things that we talk about in our platform is the ability to customize it. And we just released a new technology now that allows the interface and any customization to the interface to dynamically be updated as that goes. So let's, maybe with 9 minutes left, let's go to some of the questions that came through we didn't get a chance to go through. Let's go for the first one. Let's go to the top first. Rob, good to hear from you. You'd love to share, yeah, we'll give you access to it all. Mikhail, the point on training versus learning, I think was really interesting, right? So we, I guess on purpose hit that. So your formal training versus your pool learning. And how do we ultimately, as learning professionals, try to create that environment for both? And how do we use AI to allow more of that learning consumption to be done? At the same time, John, I get the point, right? And it's a fair point you mentioned here, right? Which is there any danger that we begin to focus on instant gratification of learning rather than a deep understanding of concepts? I think again, I think back to those 5 moments and back to those things. We curiosity is one of the things we want to plug into. It's not the only thing, right? But I do think it is one of the things. I think if you can make your platform something across different generations that people want to be go to because it satisfies their curiosity, that's a good thing. It doesn't mean, in my opinion, that we're not saying the formal learning structures are a bad thing, or the ability to problem solve are an important thing. But I do think if you've got, as LinkedIn are obviously are trialing, or maybe they've fully in and they've done the testing, I do think that if you've got different generations inside it, then I think we've got to be open-minded enough to recognize, if I talk to my kids, right, my kids' knowledge of the world and the universe is mind-boggling at 11 years old. And it's all learned from, YouTube shorts and TikTok videos. So some of it's sticking. So I think we have to, if we want curiosity to be a thing, we've probably got to be curious in a way and in a format that's relevant for the different audiences that we have. But to your point, John, not exclusively, right? Otherwise, we lose the other things we need to get to. Just think with any other questions in here that the rest of the team. Maybe go for you guys. Is there a danger of information overload, Lauren? From Lauren, Ritu or Ryan, what do you think? How do you feel about information overload in your personal and professional lives?
I think information overload is something. I think it boils down to not just modality. Something I always talk to my customers about is frequency. So it's not delivering content. Like I've done projects in the past where people want to release over 100 pieces of content in one hit on a Tuesday, and that can be information overload or death by content, as I like to call it. But even being inspired by the likes of, I always say, like Netflix and Prime and streaming services that add content on a weekly basis, if you do that with educational content, you can drive traffic to your LMS, your platform, because people want to come back, see what's new, and hitting on that curiosity piece is another factor to make you want to go back.
Yeah, there's another question here, which is, I'm sorry, as an ADHD person, it's hopefully you won't find my answer flippant but humorous. In one-to-one sessions, would you try to match ADHD teacher with ADHD learners, or will meeting differences be a strength? I think the first thing is you do risk actually the meeting not happening. Because the chance of us forgetting or being in the wrong location. Whenever I do mentoring for ADHD, really got to make sure that somebody puts me in the right place at the right time on both sides. To the extreme, and then it's embarrassing to say in a public webinar, I forgot my dog in a car once. I know we found him, it was all fine. The taxi driver brought them back, but the reality of that. At the same time, right, putting the humor aside, no one, if you if you know if you're ADHD and you know you're ADHD, same as you're autistic, I think Ritu is going to be the most empathetic person as a mentor for an autistic child, right? As you are for your child. For my children who are ADHD, I'm empathetic. I'm more empathetic than my teachers, than their teachers are, because the teachers are not neurodiverse, haven't really lived the world, and don't really understand the different ways that maybe that brain's going to learn. So I think in your example, Michaela, if I think they can turn up and be at the right place at the right time, I think empathy is going to be huge towards finding the preference and the way for that individual to learn and trialing different things that tunes into that brain. Ritu, how you feel about that?
Yeah, so really good points there, Steve. I think from my perspective and the work that we do, it's not about matching an ADHDer with another ADHDer necessarily, or an autistic with another autistic. It's about education, right? It's about understanding the different types of neurological variances, and so what that could lead to, both in terms of strengths as well as in terms of challenges. So Steve's already mentioned some of his challenges about forgetting things, or focus and so forth. So it's about understanding that. So if I am doing a one-to-one meeting, I need to understand Steve and understand ADHD and understand how that impacts him, so then I can have that one-to-one in a way that gets the best out of him and myself.
I think and I think in that particular area, right, that's the summary, right? That a greater empathy to understand all the different preferences and neurodivergent and types, right, allows a much deeper, better personalized conversation. Otherwise, and this is, I think, at the heart of the webinar, right, that if we treat everyone as if they're ourselves, then we're missing the point, right? That it was okay to do that before, right? It was okay to do it before because we didn't have the tools or the time and the resources to personalize it to the individual. It didn't exist. Now the technology exists, and now the knowledge, neurodiversity is probably only a 15-year-old subject, so we're still learning about it the whole time towards it. And as you said, probably it's not 15%, probably it's closer to 30%, I think, in terms of getting towards it. So, and that's why I love what Rita's doing with Aubilities. I think that it's needed in the world to create more awareness. So for, I've got one of my team members who manages one person who's autistic and one person who's ADHD. Before he had that training, that awareness of the subject, how could he possibly understand how to get the most out of both people? Now he has a chance and opportunity to do so that he didn't have before. So maybe the last couple of points. Do you have any reflections on the legal and ownership rights issues that arise when using AI to create paid content? I guess what I mean by paid content. So obviously we have a free YouTube channel, which we do get paid advertising on. And obviously we have to be super careful inside that. Obviously, if it's customer training and we're selling content, then again, we have to be super careful towards that. So I think the big part is, I think you've got to be super careful, right? That you look at already with generative AI, the companies who are either being sued or have changed their products to be in tune with that type part towards it. And it is easy, right? I mean, with Ryan, for example, when some of the AIs came out, Ryan's writing a book, beautiful book. And 6 months ago when this technology came out, he kept asking me to read his book. I couldn't find the time. So I cloned his voice, took a video from Fuse, put it in through a cloning voice, put the transcript in, and then got him to do some bedtime reading to me, before bed. I sent him his audio clip via WhatsApp, which he was completely freaked out by. Probably should have got his permission, but it is Ryan. He is my friend. He needs to take it funny. Would be a little bit cheeky and probably definitely breaking the law if I then published that and tried to sell an audio book of Ryan explaining his story. So maybe that gives towards it. I think we're getting to the end of the time, guys. So with 1 minute left, I think we just want to say, huge thanks, guys. Huge thanks for listening. I think it is a hugely exciting moment, right? Where the questions that we parked in the corner that were unsolvable before are now solvable, not just through technology, but the desire to want to address the problem, to research it, to look into it, bring in different minds and address that. So that's all I wanted to say. But from Ryan and Ritu, any final words from you guys?
Just a quick one to say thank you so much. If you're interested, please do get in touch and follow us on LinkedIn.
Likewise.
Cheers, guys. Thank you so much for listening in, and we'll see you soon. See you in the next one, if not before.
Take care. Bye-bye.